I'm going to start the poem Birches by Robert Frost. Now, we all are acquainted with Robert Frost because in your junior classes you have studied the famous poem Road Not Taken, and you have seen that Robert Frost always writes his poems in two different levels of reality. In the surface level, he represents one meaning, and then in the inner level, there is something else, something even more surprising waiting for us. So, in that poem, Road Not Taken, we see that the roads are not actually symbolizes the streets or roads, but they are representing the choices or options available to us. Similarly, in this poem Birches, where the poet is describing some of his childhood experiences about swinging on the birches, he also uses a deeper significance, a deeper meaning in the poem. This poem is about appearance versus reality, about imagination and the real world. Sometimes our life in this real world becomes too boring, too dull, and therefore we require to take a break from our monotonous routine. We need to leave this world of reality, not permanently. Permanently leaving would mean death. But temporarily, we are required to leave this world, take a break, and then come back to reality once again. So, this idea has been beautifully represented in this poem using the metaphor of climbing up a birch tree and then coming down using the flexible stem of the tree. So let's get into the poem, and just a few words about Robert Frost. Frost is considered one of the greatest poets of American literature. He is a very celebrated poet in America, and not just in America, but although he wrote mostly in America, his poetry is read and appreciated all over the world. And as I said right at the beginning, that he always writes poetry at multiple levels of meaning. We can find out numerous ideas and meanings hidden within his lines. So let's get into the poem. I have started with an image of a boy swinging on a branch of a tree. So this is the central image of this poem. Keep this image in your mind, it will help you to connect with the poem. The poet says, "When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I like to think some boy's been swinging them." So, who is the speaker here? The speaker is the poet himself, you can refer, or you can say the poetic persona. But whatever it is, he is an adult. So, the person who starts speaking in the poem is an adult and speaks from the adult sensibility. So he says that these days in my adulthood, whenever I see the birch trees and whenever I see them bending left and right in the wind, I imagine that these trees are being swung left and right, not by the wind, but by some naughty boy who is trying to enjoy himself by swinging on the branches or on the stem of the birch tree. Now, the poet uses a line, in the second line of the poem you see, across the lines of straighter, darker trees. Now, here the poet is contrasting the birch with the other trees. If you see the image of the birch trees, you will find that they have a white colored stem. Compared to the brown or darker colored stem of the other trees, the birch tree has a trunk that is very lighter in color, whitish in color, almost something like the eucalyptus tree that we see very commonly around us. So, while at a time the other trees are standing straight, they are not bending so much because they are not that flexible. The birch tree, in complete contrast, is bending to and fro, just like a pendulum somewhat. Is the birch tree is bending towards the left and then towards the right. But why is it bending? Because of the wind. Now, somewhat you can compare it. See, it's not a very common thing that we see all around us in India. We don't have birches around us right now here. So we can compare it to some extent with the bamboo tree. It also has a straight and very flexible trunk, a stem, I should rather say. And when the winds blow, the bamboo tree also starts bending left and right. Although the birch tree is more flexible than the bamboo. So our poet opens the poem with an image, the image of the birch tree moving to and fro in the wind. And when the poet sees this image, he is reminded of something that he had seen in his childhood. How young boys used to climb up the birch tree and make the top of the tree bend. That was like a sport for them in the rural areas. In the places where people did not have the money to afford and visit the cinema halls or go to the basketball camps and spend money for entertainment and sports, these were the very simple sports that the children used to enjoy. And you see, this is universal. This is not related only to America or to Canada or to the Western countries. This is even if you see in India, children love to climb trees in the rural space. In the cities, we hardly have trees around us, forget climbing, and we are very much afraid we may fall down, break our hands and legs. But in the rural area, that is like a sport. People love to, particularly little children love to climb up the trees and break mangoes and other fruits, or at least climb up and enjoy themselves there. So here also the poet is describing such an image from his childhood when he spent his life in a countryside, in a rural area, and there he used to see many boys like him climb up the top of the birch tree and bending the tree with their weight. Now, the birch tree is so flexible that if you climb up at the top of the tree, the stem of the tree will not break apart. It will simply bend down. It will bend so low that you can comfortably climb down from the top of the tree to the surface, to the ground. And then as soon as you release the tree, it once again becomes straight. It once again becomes erect. So it's like a long pole that helps you to climb up and then bends down to let you down and then once again regains its position. Now, this used to happen long ago in the rural countryside where the poet had grown up in his childhood. But now when the poet is adult, he no longer enjoys these kind of sports. You don't see an adult person in a suit and boot climbing at the top of a tree. It will be weird, absurd. But somehow the heart of the poet is still craving for that childish enjoyment. It's still craving for those memories of the childhood. So the poet wants to go back to his childhood. We will read and find out from the following lines that the poet wants to go back to his childhood and once again enjoy that thrill, enjoy that joy of climbing at the top of a birch tree and then jumping from the top and once again seeing the tree regain its normal erect position. But right now you need to imagine that the trees are being moved. They are shaken not by any boy but by the wind. So the reality is that the tree is moving to and fro because of the wind pressure. But the imagination here is that the poet imagines that a boy, just like he used to see in his childhood, has been pulling it down to sport, to swing on them. So right at the beginning, in the opening 3 lines, we are introduced to the theme of the poem, imagination versus reality. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay as ice storms do. So as I said, that when you climb up at the top of the tree and then you go down, the tree bends down and allows you to climb down from the top. So as you jump down from the top of the tree once again regains its normal erect position. But the ice storms do not let the trees to get that erect position once again. So here I am sharing another image. This is a birch tree. You can clearly see the white color of the tree, and it is because of the weight of the snow that has fallen on the branches of the tree and the leaves of the tree that the tree has not been able to once again regain its erect position. If it had been bent by a naughty boy, then it would have regained its position very quickly. But here, the tree has not been bent by the naughty boy. It has been bent by the pressure, by the weight of the snow that has fallen at the top of the tree. And therefore, the poet says that the snowstorms, the ice freezing on the branches and the leaves of the tree, do not allow the tree immediately to regain its erect position. Rather, it bends the tree down. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. So this is a very common image in their country. Obviously, in our surrounding, we hardly see anything like ice or something. But in their country, this is a very, very common scene. In the mornings of winter, everything is covered with snow, including the branches and the leaves of the tree. And the birch tree, after a snowstorm or maybe after a rain, when the ice freezes on the branches of the tree, they are bent because of the weight of the ice. So when the sun rises, it becomes bright once again. We can come out of our houses and see the birch trees in this position. So exactly this position which you are seeing right now on the screen is described by the poet. A winter morning scene, although we don't see the sun here, but the poet describes on a sunny morning. This image is quite common in his locality. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored, as the stair cracks and crazes their enamel. So now what happens when the heat of the sun gradually increases as the day goes ahead? It's 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m. The heat of the sun is gradually increasing. The snow or the ice slowly starts melting. They will not melt immediately because it's still very cold, it's still winter, and the temperature might be still below zero. Although it is sunny, but it might be still below zero. So the poet says that although the sun has risen, the snow starts gradually melting, but they do not melt all at once. Some sheets of ice starts breaking, and as they start breaking, they make a clicking sound. So click upon themselves is the sound that is produced, that sound which is produced when the sheets of ice starts breaking. So click will be an example of onomatopoeia, in which the sound of the ice breaking is represented with a word. And as the breeze rises, turn many colored. So why does suddenly the snow turn many colored? Because it's the spectrum. The sunlight is falling on the snow, and the snow here is acting like a prism. The snow breaks the light of the sun into the 7 colors of the spectrum. So many colors are visible. It becomes colorful as the snow starts refracting the rays of the sun. It is a beautiful scene, a beautiful sight. The clear blue sky, the bright sun, and the pure white snow all around, and then the light of the sun falling on the snow and then getting reflected back with the 7 colors of the rainbow. as the steer cracks and crazes their enamel. Enamel refers to the outer covering. You have heard the term enamel at least in relation to your teeth. Whenever you go to the dentist, they tell that there is a problem with the enamel, or you should not brush too hard because the enamel will be destroyed. So enamel means the outer cover. It's not just the outer cover of the teeth, it can be the outer covering on the bark of the tree, on the stem of the tree. That is the covering made by the snow. So as the heat of the sun, as the gentle movement of the breeze gradually breaks the sheets of snow and ice from the surface of the tree, they start making a clicking sound, and they start splitting the colors of the sun's light to the beautiful spectrum. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust. So this is a very vivid image that the poet is presenting in these two lines. As the heat of the sun increases, suddenly you will see a whole sheet of ice, or a whole lot of ice breaks apart from the top of the tree and collapses downward. So by chance, if you are standing below that tree, suddenly what will happen? A whole shower of ice will fall on the head of you as you are standing below the tree. Now, we have just finished the poem, the short story, To Build a Fire, and a very similar situation had occurred in that story when the central character of that story was trying to build a fire, and by mistake he built it below a tree, and due to the heat of the fire, the snow that was accumulated at the top of the tree started gradually becoming loose, and they fell on him as well as on the fire, extinguishing the fire. So that whole lot of snow falling from the top of the tree has been referred as avalanching. Avalanche normally means a huge, you can say a mass of snow rolling down from the top of a mountain. This is very deadly and very common, particularly in the high altitude regions. The many mountain climbers have lost their lives caught in an avalanche. It cannot be predicted. Suddenly a whole river of snow starts flowing from the top of the mountain, and it smashes everything that comes on its way. So here it is not like that. It's not the avalanche coming from the top of a mountain. It's just the huge mass of snow that was accumulated at the top of the tree has started melting due to the heat of the sun, and they started collapsing, they started falling down from the top of the tree, and that has been compared to an avalanche. But what is shred crystal shells? Why the snow has been compared to crystal? Well, this is very easy for us to understand, because just imagine the ice that you get inside the deep freezer of your refrigerator. It's almost like a transparent crystal. So sometimes the snow is in the form of that powdery mass, sometimes it is in the form of frozen sheets of ice. So the snow which falls down from the top of the tree, it can fall down as the powdery snow in form of avalanche, or it can break out from those sheets of frozen ice and fall down as pieces of crystals, as pieces of ice. So poet is comparing the ice, because of its transparency, as a crystal. Such heaps of broken glass to sweep away, you would think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. Now, the way the ice is falling down from the top of the tree, the white powdery mass and the crystal pieces, the chunks of ice falling down from the top of the tree, it makes the poet imagine that the palace in heaven has collapsed and it has started falling down. So before explaining this image, just one small note you just notice here, that the poet has been giving a very realistic description of the scene in these few lines. In the last 10 lines, the poet has not used anything imaginary. What he has been telling is a very typical thing that happens in the temperate region in winter season. But in this particular line, the poet once again goes to the world of imagination. He now compares the snow with the crystals that is believed to have been used to construct the dome of heaven. Now, according to the Christian mythology, the heaven is made of a substance called ether. The floor of the heaven is crystalline, and perhaps the dome, if at all there is a dome, or if at all there is a palace, huge palace in heaven, that might also be made of crystal. So what would happen if a huge palace completely made of glass and crystal breaks down? A huge amount of glass will start shattering and crumbling down. Now here our poet is comparing the snow that has fallen down, the crystals of ice that has fallen down from the top of the tree to the surface of the ground, to the collapse of a glass dome. But it is not any ordinary dome, it is the dome of the heaven, the inner dome of heaven, perhaps the chamber in which God himself sits along with his chosen angels. So this is again a piece of imagination, where the poet is comparing the broken sheets of ice to the chunks of crystals and shattered glasses of the dome of heaven fallen apart. Here we see a metaphor has been used. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break, though once they are bowed for so low for long, they never right themselves. So again I am referring to this image which I have shown you earlier. If the snow remains on the tree for a very long time, for a few days altogether, because sometimes they have very bad weather and snowstorm continuing for a whole week also. So if this tree remains in this position for a very long time, then it will become very difficult for the tree to once again regain its position even after the snow melts. So our poet says that when the snow has stayed at the top of the tree for a very long time, the birches would hardly regain their normal position. They have been dragged, they have been bowed down by the load of the snow for such a long time that it will be very difficult for them to once again stand erect, to once again regain their normal position. Although they do not break, because I told you that normally when in our region there is a storm, we see that the branches of the trees will break apart. But birches is a tree which is perhaps more suited to the environment of those countries infested with snow, that it doesn't easily break apart. The tree will not break, but at least it will remain bent for a very long time. You may see their trunks arching in the woods year afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground. Now again, this image is very beautifully represented in the poem. You see, this poem is so rich in imagery. The imagery of the temperate region of the countryside of America is very beautifully described in this poem. See, this incident of the tree bending down because of the snow might have happened several years ago, but now the tree has permanently lost its erectness and it has become permanently arched, bent like this. So what happens is, the tree is alive, therefore the leaves are still growing, the branches are still growing, but instead of growing upward, the leaves are growing downward. You can see in this image, the leaves are all growing downward. So maybe even after winter, when spring and summer comes, the tree will remain in the same position. The leaves will grow and it will stand in that same position because the snow has permanently damaged the erect position of the birch tree. Now the poet uses another beautiful simile here to describe this birch tree to a girl who is kneeling down to dry her hairs. Now maybe in the urban location it is not so common to see a girl drying her hair like this, but in a rural landscape this image is very common. Just after taking a bath, many women would come out of their houses in the sun and bend down to warm or to dry their hair. I have got somewhat a relevant image, although it is not very relevant, but I think this would give you an idea why the poet is comparing the birch tree bent down to that of a girl who is bending down to dry her hairs. See, the difference is that the tree is bending forward and the girl is bending backward. But if you Google a bit, you can see images of women trying to dry their hairs, even bending forward, looking exactly like the birch tree. So the poet here is using a very appropriate image of a woman trying to dry her hair, comparing it with the birch tree, which represents the body of the woman, and the branches and the leaves representing the hair. Like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. So a woman stretching her hands and legs and sitting with their head bowed down so that the hair could be dried in the sun. But I was going to say the truth broke in when all her matter of fact about the ice storm. I should prefer to have some boy bent them as he went out in to fetch the cows. Our poet says that although as an adult person I know the truth very well that the birch tree has been bent down not by the boy, it is basically bent down because of the effects of the weather, it is bent down because of the storm, it is bent down because of the freezing ice. But still I prefer to imagine that the tree has been bent down by a naughty boy. What kind of boy? A boy who was taking his cattle to graze. So his father must have given him the responsibility to take his cattle for grazing to the fields, and while he was taking his cows and sheep to graze in the fields, he saw some birch trees. He utilized that opportunity. He climbed up at the top of the tree and then bent the tree towards the ground, jumped from the top of the tree and then went forward to his work. So again, while coming back from his grazing after completing his hard day's task of grazing the cows, once again he plays the same game. When he passes through the forest of birch trees, he once again climbs up to the top of the tree, makes the tree bend down as much as he could by reaching till the topmost portion of the tree, and then when the head of the tree is almost bent towards the ground, then he jumps from it. So this is like a entertainment, a sport this boy has on a regular basis. And this is what our poet likes to imagine in context of the bent birch tree. He wants to ignore the reality. He wants to ignore the truth that he knows very well. That as an adult, he knows the scientific reason. He wants to ignore it. And he wants to get lost in the world of imagination and fantasy. And this is where we realize where is the poet heading towards. The poet is clearly heading towards the message of the poem that it is necessary to take a break from the reality. The reality of the world all around us is extremely boring, extremely mundane. And if we always remain stuck in this reality, then our life would not have any spice, any variety. So it might not be possible for us to take a break by always going out on a vacation. It's not possible for everyone to go on a vacation physically, to take your body and your family and your belongings from one place to another and then take a holiday. So if that is not possible, use your mind to go on a vacation. Imagine something. Imagine that you have been to some beautiful place where your body actually cannot travel. You can, using the power of your mind, you can travel to a different continent, you can travel to a different planet, you can travel to a different realm altogether. So use that imagination for the time being. Let the imagination carry you out of this mundane reality, boring reality of this world. So our poet asserts the point here that although I know the truth that the ice storm has bent the tree, but I prefer to imagine that some naughty cowboy has bent the tree while going to graze the cows and then coming back with his cows. Now, is it possible that the poet is referring to his own childhood? Of course it is possible. This poem has, it is believed that this poem has certain autobiographical elements in it. It is believed that the poet also had a childhood amidst the rural landscape of America, and he missed that life very much after he grew up. So maybe this boy is none other than the poet himself. Maybe the birch tree bent by the snowstorm reminds the poet how he himself used to climb at the top of the birch tree and bend and enjoy the jump. So this boy is none other than the poet himself in his childhood. See, some boy too far away from town to learn baseball. Just like in England or in India, we have a craze for cricket. Every holiday you see the boys playing gully cricket. In the Americas and in most of, I think it should be entire North America, particularly America and Canada, they have a craze for this game of baseball, somewhat like cricket but not exactly cricket. So this boy stays at a very rural, remote place. They do not have baseball camps or coachings there. So what kind of games and sports they will enjoy? Not cricket, but the rural games, the rural sports. If you see, maybe today in 2021, the Indian villages are also very much interested and in cricket, and the boys or even girls play very good cricket in villages. But maybe 20-30 years ago, the young children in the villages played kabaddi or kho-kho, the rural games, the local games, more than cricket or football. Similarly, in the villages of America, the boy was far away from the influence of the modern games like baseball. So he enjoyed himself, entertained himself by this simple, down to earth sport like swinging on a birch tree, whose only play was what he found himself summer or winter and could play alone. So maybe this boy did not have companion, and that is also a reality about the West. In India, you go out, you have 20 friends to play with you. We have a very crowded country. But their country is so less populated, and in those days it was even lesser in population, that for acres and acres there was only one house. People did not have friends and companions so easily accessible or available in those countries. They had a very less population. They were underpopulated countries. So this boy did not have a friend, did not have a companion. So he had to satisfy himself with a game where he could play without a friend. So the tree became his friends, nature became his friends. Just like Wordsworth has highlighted that nature is the ultimate friend of mankind. It is also the philosopher and guide of mankind, but more importantly, it is the friend of mankind. When man is lonely, if anyone else is not there to help him come out of that sadness, nature is there. Mother Nature never leaves that soul that loves her. So this boy did not have any companion, did not have the modern game of baseball to entertain himself. That is why throughout summer and winter, throughout all seasons, he played this game of swinging the birches. He climbed the tree, pulled the top of the tree as much as possible towards the ground, and then when the top of the tree is almost about to touch the ground, he jumped down, and then again he climbed. So this game he kept on playing alone and alone. One by one, he subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again. So one by one, he started bending all the trees. So as if the trees were his enemies, and he used to climb and bend his enemies down one by one, all the trees, until all the birches in the garden or in the wood of his father was bent. So it was like a sport for the boy to defeat the trees, to take away the erectness from the trees, until he took the stiffness out of them, making them flexible. And not one but hung limp, not one was left for him to conquer. So you see, the poet is here using the war metaphor here. It was like a war between the boy and the tree. The tree would continuously try to regain its position. The boy would not allow the tree to regain its position. The tree would try to drop the boy and then come back straight once again. But again the boy will climb and bow the tree down. So this contest between the tree and the boy continued for a long time, until the boy was finally able to bend the tree permanently. So once the tree was permanently bent, once the tree did not regain its erect position, the boy felt it has won the tree, it has conquered the tree. And see how appropriate the metaphor is, war metaphor is. When you defeat your enemy, what do you expect? The enemy should bend down in front of you. When the Britishers came to India and defeated the Indian Maharajas, they did not kill them, every one of them. They rather made them bow down in front of the British. And here also, the boy, thinking himself to be the lord of the jungle, did the same thing with the trees, making them bow down in front of him. So we shall continue this discussion in the next part.